2017, with the FES, we had organized a consultation, a genderlog on the issue of sexual harassment at the workplace at the Tata Institute of Social Studies in Mumbai. And this was the time when many students had given, there was that list that was drafted, and people had submitted names on that list of who all in the academia had sexually harassed them. And at this gender log, we were discussing why did they not use the act? Why did they have to go and make the names public on social media? And the primary criticism that came out was that the act is too hierarchical. It gives the employer too much powers and not enough to the external person, external member. Now, I know that we will have discussion on this. We may even have a disagreement, I think, with Dr. Anagha. I've already discussed this with her privately. She may have an opinion about how the external members also need to be trained more and to be made, their capacities have to be developed more. Incidentally, speaking about the external member, there's also been a very positive development from the Supreme Court, who have said that not every Tom, Dick, and Harry can be hired as an external member. And this has to do with the judgment of the Punjab and Sindh Bank, where the Punjab and Sindh Bank had hired their lawyer who was on their panel and appearing for them on their other cases as the external member. And obviously, because she was dependent and she was getting cases from them, and that was certainly adding to her income, why would she take a position against the Punjab and Sindh Bank when it comes to a case of sexual harassment? She would go obviously with wherever the management wanted the case to go. With these words, I do agree with Damayanti. There have to be changes. My own experience with dealing with a few sexual harassment cases during COVID has been that there is a lot of stress over issues of labor law, and sexual harassment comes under labor law, both by employers who are scared of having to pay employees, and they themselves are in a position of not knowing whether they will last beyond a certain point of time or not because of the economic contraction, and employees who are very scared of losing their jobs. In the process, I don't want to say that the law is being misused because it wasn't proved, but however, there were 2 cases that came where the employee was terminated. And I don't know if this is just my experience or other people have also experienced the same, but with the termination, she filed a case of sexual harassment at the workplace. So it's we are living in very difficult times. Okay. So, so with this, I'd like to invite Dr. Anagha Sarpotdar. She's joining us all the way from Mumbai. Dr. Anagha is the chairperson of the local committee in Mumbai City District. She is also from the TISS, and her entire PhD thesis was on the subject of sexual harassment at the workplace. In fact, it was sexual harassment of women, a socio-legal study of the organized sector in Mumbai. So you can throw more light on the issue, and please, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Gayatri. Gayatri, I would like to, I will be sharing the screen. I'll be sharing a PPT. I hope the PPT is visible.
It's visible.
Yeah. Good evening all. Thank you WPC and FES for the opportunity. Today I will be discussing very briefly the implementation of the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace into bracket Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. It is through this that I will cover prevention of sexual harassment, possible amendments to the act, and of course issues pertaining to the external member. So this is what I will be covering. I think before we start talking about the 2013 Act, and I'm very consciously not using the word posh, because I'm not really convinced with the term, because it's an overused term, and I'm not sure whether it really conveys the meaning. So I will be using the term 2013 Act. So before we start talking about the 2013 Act, I would want to go back to the basics, where we very briefly look at the landmark Vishakha judgment. In fact, today Hindustan Times is carrying a full-fledged article on the hero of the story, that is Bhauri Devi. It is also there on Twitter. And I would like to very briefly speak about the vision of Vishakha. So, as far as I understand, the Vishakha judgment was an innovation, because for the first time, sexual harassment of women at workplace was looked at from the women's human rights point. The accountability was shifted from an individual woman to institutions, and of course, prevention was prioritized. Most importantly, what we see, what we saw happening was that sexual harassment was moved from a moralistic language of eve teasing, outraging modesty, to violation of constitutional right of women to equality and dignity. So this is something which happened in India for the first time. And of course, this was to counter the criminal law, because all of us know what happened in the Bhateri gang rape case, that is the Bhauri Devi case, and we also know what happened in the Tehelka case. Now, what happens in the criminal law is that the woman who complains or the survivor has to prove beyond reasonable doubt certain acts of sexual violence which no one has seen. She has to keep repeating those facts. Maybe she has to go through a medical test, which is hard to endure. And as I said, we have seen this in all cases. More so, the focus of the criminal law is on punishing the individual rather than altering the discriminatory conduct which exists at the workplace. So that is something which happens in the criminal law. And if we, the flip side is the Vishakha judgment, which, looks at, or rather, and of course, Vishakha has been codified into into an act. But what Vishakha did was that it saw engagement between the employer and the employees, and there was a shared responsibility. It envisaged a workplace with increased awareness on issue of sexual harassment. And this was also happening because Vishakha has allowed collaboration between employers and non-profit organization. And the aim of Vishakha was to influence mindsets and change in attitude with the help of the external experts who we now call as external members. So as far as my understanding goes, Vishakha was an innovation, and of course it is the base. Now, my question is, are we really living up to the spirit of Vishakha, the vision of Vishakha, and of course, objectives of the Act? I will not repeat the objectives of the Act, because I am assuming that all of us are familiar with the 2013 Act and its objectives. So are we really focusing on what the law is saying in terms of its letter, or the spirit of the law, which says that it is there for empowering women? And are we just doing some technical compliance, some tick mark compliance, or because the language that is also used these days is compliance? And I come from a world where the word was implementation and not compliance. Because when we talk about implementation, we are talking about implementation in implementing the law in its spirit and not just letter. So these are some questions that I have. And sadly, I don't think we are living up to the spirit of Vishakha and the objectives of the Act, rather the vision of Vishakha. And the reason why I'm saying this, of course, I will be I will be able to say this only when I also very briefly talk about the problems. I'm going to focus more on strategies, but of course, I will also briefly discuss the problems. Now, I am not, because I also do a bit of academic writing. I'm used to using a lot of references, etc. But for the ease of understanding, references and statistics are not really quoted, or they are minimum. Now, the first issue that I see, and honestly, there is no, these issues are not arranged in the order of priority or anything. It is the the way I will be talking about these issues is very, very random. It is not really that training is important and functioning of local committee. It is going to be last, but it's not that it is not important. It's just happened that training came to my mind first. Now, what I understand with respect to training is that now what we are seeing largely is that the trainings are happening online, and a large number of employees are being put through this online content. And the justification that is given for online content is that it is low cost, and for organizations who have wider spread, it is easier to use online training. But if we look at researches, and in India, the law came only in 2013, so it is not even a 10-year-old act. So we don't really have studies which look into the efficacy of this online training. But if we look at some other countries, like, for example, the United States of America, where this online training has been used for past 30 years, it is showing that it is not making much effect. More so because these online trainings are happening with the purpose of, again, this tick mark, or tick box compliance, and they are not really happening with the aim of preventing sexual harassment. In fact, these trainings are very symbolic, and they don't really convey the essence of the issue. So various such things. For the interest of time, I will not go into the details. But what I think is that these online trainings do not really encourage women to complain. So none of these modules, because the aim of prevention, along with saying that, okay, don't indulge in sexual harassment, or what is sexual harassment, I think one of the most important objectives of the training should be to encourage women to complain, and also tell them that irrespective of the power and position enjoyed by the respondent in the organization, cognizance will be taken of their complaint, and it will be looked into impartially and neutrally. But that does not happen in online training. Also, I have seen in certain trainings that it is celebrated that there is zero reporting. And this does not happen so much in online trainings, but it happens more during in-person trainings, that zero reporting is celebrated and people are happy that there are no complaints. But no complaint coming mean that there is no sexual harassment? So I think this kind of a wrong messaging also happens quite frequently during trainings. And as I said earlier, the online training does not really assure women that there will be no retaliation, and it just says that this is sexual harassment by giving some examples, and it just kind of touches various aspects. Now, the second problem that I see in the field, of course, is with respect to the anti-sexual harassment policies. So most of these anti-sexual harassment policies, or which are commonly known as POSH policies, I see that most of them are copy-paste of the act. I don't really understand that when there is a full-fledged act in place which will prevail over all the company policies, not just the anti-sexual harassment policy, the company code of conduct, and any other policy that the company may have with respect to employees. why do we need to have a policy which is copy paste of the law? According to me, and I'm coming to the solutions. According to me, the policy needs to cover aspects which are maybe not covered by the law, or there may be certain gray areas in the law. The policy needs to cover that. The policy needs to very clearly talk about the fact that the law is gender specific, and take a very clear position if the policy is gender neutral or gender specific. And if it is a gender neutral policy, what is going to be the redress mechanism for persons who are not falling in the category of women. Also, the policy should talk about verbal complaints, that if the complaint is verbal in nature, what is the internal committee going to do? It should necessarily talk about things like the quorum, because as all of us know that there is a rule 7 which does not really necessitate the inclusion of external member in the quorum. So the policy should talk about it. The policy should also very clearly talk about that, if the respondent resigns while the inquiry is pending, what is going to be the stand of the organization. So I will of course not talk about all aspects, but I am just giving some examples, some points which are not covered by the law. I also think that I have seen policies which say that the complainant should warn the respondent prior to complaining. I think policies should not have such things that it is mandatory for the complainant to warn the respondent before complaining, because the law does not require the complainant to do that. And of course, I have also seen policies which have a clause which say what is not sexual harassment. And I think a policy does not require to say what is not sexual harassment, because once the law has already defined what is sexual harassment, and it is of course going to be very, very case specific. There is no need for a policy to say what is not sexual harassment. In fact, I think the scope of an anti-sexual harassment policy should be broadened to include not just sexual behavior, but also sexist behavior and behavior which is gender discriminatory. So, these are some of the suggestions that I have with respect to the policy. Now, coming to the external member, all of us know that Vishakha has actually set a precedent by including an outside expert in the complaints committee. So that time it was known as complaints committee. Now it is known as internal committee. And that particular provision of Vishakha was retained in the 2013 Act. Now the fact that the provision was retained by the 2013 Act means that it is an important provision, and the role which is played by an external member in the committee is very, very important. However, if we look at both the Vishakha judgment and the 2013 Act, we don't really see elaboration of the role which an external member is expected to play, but that we see happening in this 2014 Bombay High Court judgment. I'm not going to read out the slide because all of you are able to see the slide. I just want to say that when one reads the content on this slide, we know that the role played by the external member in the internal committee is crucial. And in fact, it is the role of the external member to make all the efforts to see that a person charged with sexual harassment does not escape the clutches of the law, which is, I think, a very, very important part of the work which is done by external member. And of course, in the interest of time, again, I'm not going point by point. I'm sure all of you have all of you know about this judgment, and those of you who may be looking at it for the first time, you all may please read what is there on the slide, and we can very comfortably say that the role played by the external member in the internal committee is indispensable. But now, what is happening? I have individual experiences. When I have worked as external member, I have faced certain problems and certain malpractices that have been done by employers. So most employers are not really keen to bring in an external member. The external member is appointed only because it is compulsory by law. In fact, there are researches. There was a study by Lawyers Collective, I think somewhere early 2002 or 2003, which very clearly shows that employers are not really interested in including an outside person in the committee. Now, what are the things which I have seen? What are the malpractices that I have observed, which have been done by employers and internal committees? So I have been in situations where I have not been informed about certain complaints that were reported by women, and of course I will come to know about the complaint only when I'm informed rather by the employer. And this has also led to the employer doing certain things behind my back. So sometimes conciliation was done behind my back, or some kind of a settlement, or the complainant was pressurized to withdraw her complaint, etc. So all these things happened behind my back. And um, also, I have seen that I have also been in situations where I was actually cornered and I was threatened by the presiding officer of the internal committee. I was also in a situation where I was not provided any documents pertaining to the case, citing the reason that it is about the privacy policy of the company does not allow sharing of documents. Now, how does an external member be a part of an inquiry if they do not have any documents, if they don't have a copy of the complaint, if they don't have reply from the respondent, if they don't have statements of witnesses? So I am just randomly listing out some of the malpractices done by employers that I have seen. And of course, let me tell you, I have not continued on these committees. I have registered my protest. I have, kind of confronted the employer, and I have, resigned from such committees. But these are the malpractices that I have seen. Now, what are the issues? So that was just about employers. Now, what are the issues that I see with external members? So when Gayatri was speaking, she said she had a discussion with me, and while the employers are a big problem, I also see that external members are not really geared up, or external members are not really empowered to deal with employers. And why is that happening? So I think the first thing which I see is that most external members, they fall short of the basic perspective on violence against women, which consists of understanding about gender, about power, about sexuality. I also see many external members are clueless about the inquiry procedure. And this I am saying on the basis of I am part of a WhatsApp group where I see external members asking questions which are very, very intrinsic, which are very, very fundamental to the procedure of inquiry. And I wonder that if this person has such kind of questions, I am not sure how this person is able to function as an external member. I also see that external members who may be running certain companies, etc., are constantly investing their resources in organizing trainings for HR persons or for employers, for internal committees, but I don't really see anything happening much with complainants, because I think women employees or women who, whoever, I mean, I'm not just talking about women employees, it could be any woman in the context of work. I think our resources need to be invested with women. Our resources need to be invested in understanding the larger issues of violence against women, and not just on English speaking urban women working with the corporate, because all of this has come from Bauri Devi, who was a rural woman, and it is because of her struggle that we are, actually enjoying the benefits of the act. I think. That should be enough. But I just want to say that it is very important that external members build their capacities. I also think that if ever an external member has a issue or has a problem with the employer, I think there needs to be a forum where the external member can talk about it without breaching confidentiality, because of course confidentiality is a very important part of the work that is done by the external member. And of course we can discuss this more when we have questions and answers. I also see that there is no data, because as I said in the beginning, I do a bit of writing on sexual harassment at workplace, and there is no data. There is no compiled data. So the data that is available is scattered. The data that is available is random, and it is piecemeal. So there is actually, as per there is a section 23, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, there is a section 23 of the act which says that the government is supposed to monitor the implementation and maintain the data, that is number of cases, etc. And I suppose they see this happening through the annual reports, but it is not really happening. I think the annual reports are just lying with the collector office or the women and child office. So there is actually no data on sexual harassment at workplace. In fact, there is no sector specific data available also for us to understand whether, what is the kind of reporting that is happening, say for example in the manufacturing sector. Maybe only the listed companies publish their data. That too, that is, it's kind of a secondary data. It is not really coming from the government. So that is with respect to the data. Now coming to the functioning of the internal committee, I think there are multiple issues when it comes to functioning of internal committees, with respect to knowledge, with respect to attitude and skills. I would not really focus much on knowledge, because I'm assuming that knowledge can be gained through various ways. So I think it is the responsibility of the external member to empower the members of the internal committee, and it is also it is also the responsibility of the internal committee members to keep themselves updated by reading whatever is happening in the outside world. And that is the way knowledge and information can be obtained. But the main issue is about attitude and skills. And I think because the act confers powers of civil court on the internal committee, I have seen internal committee members behaving like judges, because the feeling that they have is that we are judges and we have to behave in a, I mean, maybe this is what they think, that they can or they are allowed to behave in a high-handed manner. So that is one of the problems with the internal committee. Of course, skills are also most of the times lacking, the way questions are asked. And we have also seen judgments like the Air France judgment, where the Delhi High Court has very clearly said that it is the responsibility of the committee to make the complainant comfortable. Way back back in 2004, the NALCO judgment also spoke about the manner in which the committee was asking questions, asking the complainant to display the molestation incident, etc. So I think, and I'm sure there are many other issues related to the internal committee, and maybe internal committees, because in January 2021, there is a petition that was filed in the Bombay High Court, wherein problems faced by the internal committees were highlighted. So I'm sure internal committee members have their own own share of problems which they would want to say, but I think that should be coming of not from external members but from internal committee members who may not be there here today. Now, what is the recommendation, or what is the solution that possibly can happen here is that, and I again, for the in the interest of time, I'm not going to elaborate it on much, but the internal committee basically needs to have a trauma informed approach to sexual harassment. When we say trauma informed approach, what it actually means is that the focus of the internal committee needs to be on the impact of sexual harassment on the complainant. It is very important that the internal committee works towards empowering the complainant, gives her voice, gives her choices, and there are certain procedures in the inquiry, like cross examination, which can be extremely triggering. And when I say triggering, what I mean is that they may trigger the cross examination. If the complainant is compulsorily brought in front of the respondent, it may trigger the memories of the incident. There is a high possibility that the complainant may relive the incident of sexual harassment, and that could be like re-traumatization or re-victimization. So it is very, very important that the internal committee takes in a trauma informed approach. And maybe some other time, I can talk about it more, or all of you may also read about the trauma informed approach. Now, coming to the local committee functioning, the first and the most important thing is that probably not all states have constituted local committees. It is also possible, or rather it is happening, that in many states local committees are constituted, but the information is not publicly available. So if I want to know that a particular district, say in West Bengal, what are the contact details of the local committee in West Bengal, I don't really have a ready-made list with me. I don't have a list of names. I don't have their phone numbers. I don't have their email IDs. So if I want to refer a case to any local committee across India, that is the biggest problem. And of course, what I said earlier, most likely the local committee does not exist, or it exists only on paper. Additionally, the local committees are also fraught with several issues of functioning, which again, I will go into the detail only if there are questions pertaining to that. So I think it is, as far as my suggestions or recommendations are concerned, I think it is very important that that publicity is given to the local committee. How are we going to reach a village woman? Because in some states there are local committees, but there are no nodal officers, or the nodal officers are not functioning. So how do we reach a village woman? How do we reach a woman who is maybe at the lowest level within the social hierarchy? All of us know that poverty and caste go hand in hand. Most of the Dalit Bahujan women are in the unorganized sector. How do we reach? In fact, today there is a report which has come, which some group or a network has published a sexual violence which is caste based. So they have come out with this report, and it is very important that local committee members read these reports and understand the way caste, class, and gender intersects, especially in rural India. So I think that is very important. Of course, capacity building of local committees is most important. Last but not the least, it is very important that the local committees carve out a role for themselves. Now, I will just give a very simple example. The act says that the local committee, if it receives a complaint from a domestic worker, it is supposed to forward it to the police. If prima facie it is established that the case is of sexual harassment. Now, this is a good opportunity for the local committee to actually do a small inquiry or a primary or a preliminary inquiry, because how will you establish prima facie if a case is of sexual harassment or not? You can call the employer. Otherwise, the act nowhere says that the local committee can call the employer of the domestic worker. But for establishing prima facie whether it's a case of sexual harassment, I think one of the ways to do is to call the employer or the respondent. And of course, this requires more discussion as to how the role can be carved out as far as local committee is concerned. Monitoring and evaluation. So there are multiple issues with respect to monitoring and evaluation. Monitoring and evaluation is left to the state governments. I don't see monitoring and evaluation happening at all. In fact, the sections 20, 23, 24, 25, all these sections in the act are about data gathering, are about monitoring and evaluation, but there is a huge gap. In fact, at one point in time in Maharashtra, it was not even, I'm not sure, I think even now there is a confusion that who will be monitoring, whether the district collector will monitor or whether the women and child department will monitor the implementation. So I think all these things need to be clarified at the state level. And of course, much more can be discussed when it comes to role of the center. Last but not the least, of course, budget is something which is not there. Let me tell you that I have been functioning as the local, so this is my second tenure as a chairperson of the local committee, and we have not been paid honorarium and travel. So we have been actually running the local committee by spending money from our pockets. And in fact, I have written an academic article after interviewing 5 local committee chairpersons. The article has been reviewed and it will be published soon. But that article also says the same thing, that most local committees do not have any budget for creating awareness. How do we reach domestic workers? How do we reach women, working with units having less than 10 employees? So all these problems. And before I finish, I just want to say that I think the section 14 on false and malicious complaints needs to be removed, because this was a section which we had a problem right from the inception of the act. In fact, I have heard about complaints, in fact, I've heard about cases where employers, not women, but employers have misused this particular section, and the committee has recommended termination from service. And all those women complainants had to say that I had not registered a false complaint, and no other act has this kind of a section. Then I fail to understand why only the sexual harassment law has this section on false and malicious complaints. And of course, the section 7, which I also spoke earlier, which talks about the quorum for the internal committee. It does not include the external member, and I think many external members are excluded from internal committee meetings and inquiries by employers by giving an excuse that the presence and participation of external member is not compulsory as per the law. as per law, the presiding officer can hold meetings and inquiries along with any two members of the committee. So I think one of the members out of the two should be the external member. And of course, as I conclude, I just want to say this is of course at the larger policy level, that the ILO convention needs India should actually ratify this particular ILO convention. And I think that will be a good start, because once you are a signatory and you ratify a particular convention, the government will be bound to then enforce this particular law in its spirit. So having said this, I would like to conclude, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Anagha. If you could stop screen sharing now. Can I request that you hold on to your questions, or if you would like to type your questions in the chat, because we have two more resource persons and we will take everybody's questions together. So next, I would like to invite Sania Talwar to speak on her experiences. Sania is a lawyer by education. She's also a posh synergist, which means that she works with different sectors to bring about synergy in prevention of sexual harassment. And maybe Sania, you could explain a little bit about that, because there would be interest on how you do that. We did share Sania's article on the difference between sexual harassment and gender-based discrimination with everybody who had registered. I hope you were able to read it. Sania is also the editor at a legal news and commentary platform called LawBeat, where she heads a team of reporters working pan-India, and she has experience on legal journalism and courtroom reporting. So Sania, over to you. And Dr. Anagha, thank you for the presentation. We will, of course, ask you questions after the resource persons have completed.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Gayatri. I think Dr. Anagha pretty much comprehensively covered a lot of aspects of the Act. I'd like to go over them from my own perspective, from my own lens as well. But I'll start with talking about what I mean by designating myself as a posh synergist. Well, I come from a school of thought where I think that when you, as also rightly mentioned by Dr. Anagha, when you jot down do's and don'ts, I don't think that it really works out very well for people. I think it's always better to engage in discourse. So when you're exactly there speaking to an organization, you're talking to an organization for the sake of implementation of the Act, and they are at a different footing than you. Say, for example, if they want to say that, we just want to do a compliance, that's all we want to do. Like Dr. Anagha had also pointed out that, compliance is not really on the face of it. And well, the Act requires that everybody complies with it, so that, we also want to do that. You are coming from a school of thought where you want to make sure that it's effectively complied with. So your definition as somebody who's working in this space, who's had experience in this space, is effective implementation so far as to say that, it is also to do with making sure that the trainings that you're conducting are not just, just a list of do's and don'ts for everybody to read, or a speech that I, go over at, say, a physical online session, or even on either of the sessions that we conduct. I think it's more to do with sharing about what is sexual harassment and what is not sexual harassment. I'm also coming from the school of thought of understanding that this has caused a lot of problems because the inability to recognize what really is sexual harassment has often led to situations where inquiries have taken place on complaints which do not really which come within the Act, which do not really get defined under the Act per se. And then they are carried forward, they are challenged in courts, and then the entire litigation cycle starts. So I strongly feel for pendency in courts also, and I feel that when it comes to the POSH Act, it's a lot to do with really changing things around, or building things around at the grassroots level. And when the employer is at a different footing than you, when you're introduced, in the synergy of making sure and going forward about how to implement the entire act, how to really conduct awareness sessions, how to really train them, I think it is very important to explain to them the economic aspect of this also. I think that is very, very important. Of course, the social legal aspect, the aspect of the trauma that a complainant faces is very important. That has to be highlighted. All the aspects have to be highlighted. They have to also be explained that this can lead to a situation where a litigation floodgate can open. In fact, I'd like to point out very recently there was a judgment passed in the Kerala High Court, and this was a judgment which took 5 years. So this was a division bench, so 2 judge bench passed this judgment, and they only further clarified on what the act already says. So the complaint was filed in 2015, and in 2021 the division bench goes on to reiterate whatever the act had already said. So this entire laxity and this entire loss of time which we are encountering, even from the court's perspective, from the court's lens, is a little bit problematic. I think that I am able to convince most of the employers that we can't really do this as a one-time measure when you're conducting an awareness session or a training session, because it's not something that just happens. You just have a speech, you have a talk, and you go away. It has to be ongoing. Also, I think the act specifically says that you have to organize these trainings, these awareness sessions regularly. Okay, so the act is not specifically pointing out at all about how many times you are required to actually have these trainings. I think that is one of the amendments that the act should definitely put forth. I don't believe in telling a company or an organization that these are the number of sessions that you need to conduct. I think the company, whoever is the stakeholders, all the stakeholders of the company know the company better than me, and they perhaps know what the company needs more than I do, so far as at least POSH is concerned. So to really build that synergy from that perspective, you need to move forward when you are implementing POSH in an organization. Secondly, I think that pointing out what is not sexual harassment in the policy, correctly pointed out by Dr. Naga, I don't think that should be really listed out. But when you're conducting awareness sessions, when you're conducting training sessions, that has to be distinguished. There has to be a separation there to enable, in order to understand, in order to make the audience understand that, there is bullying, and then there is bullying with sexual overtones. There is, workplace harassment, and then there is gender bias. Also, I don't agree, and I respectfully disagree with what Dr. Naga had said about the inclusion of gender discrimination in the Act. I'm coming from the point of view of, the fact that this Act was a special legislation, which was formulated to specifically counteract instances of sexual harassment. So if you start including gender bias, you start including sexism in the Act, there is going to be some sort of confusion when you're handling complaints of sexual harassment for the internal committees, as well as for those who are at the receiving end of such incidents. In fact, this was further clarified by the courts last year, and they said that the Act specifically says that gender bias is not something that needs to be pointed. This is the Bombay High Court judgment, and they say that when there is a specific definition of sexual harassment, then gender bias, sexist remarks, misogynistic comments cannot really come under the Act. So I come from a different school of thought there. Also, I think that external members' role. A lot of organizations tend to think that external members have a veto of sorts, and because they are independent, they are supposed to call the shots, and they are the people who are going to make all the decisions. Well, it's absolutely not like that in practice. I think even the Act does not say that an external member has to have a veto power, or for that matter, a majority decision needs to come out. So in my reading of the law, the decision that comes out from the inquiry committee, the report that has to come out from the inquiry committee has to be a unanimous decision. It cannot be a decision which is of a majority, of a veto vote, of anybody, which in turn means that every single member, including the presiding officer, the people who are a part of the organization and they're part of the internal committees need to be extremely well endowed with the law. Need to understand what the law says. They need to understand how to deal with real-time situations, because somebody who's an independent person, somebody who's an outsider in the organization will not understand or will not be there at that moment when the incident of sexual harassment per se has taken place. So in order to make these members of the internal committee and the presiding officers understand that this is how you're supposed to handle a situation like this is very, very important. And I agree that whoever's the external member, if they are allowed to do that for the organization, they should go right ahead and they should engage in capacity building with the internal committees. Also, I think that there is some issue so far as, of course, influence of employers is concerned when it comes to internal committees and conducting inquiries. It's been there with me also. But in my limited experience, limited knowledge, I have also encountered situations where I've been able to put out very firmly yet subtly that this is something that is going to be independent, and if it is not done independently, it could have consequences for you, it could have consequences for the organization. And that is very important to put out, that this is something that needs to be independent per se. In fact, a couple of times I've been asked what is the status of the inquiry. So there's a lot of curiosity, and there's a lot of inkling to understand what is going on in the inquiry committee, what is the external member doing. So I mean, in that situation, I've usually said that this is the status of the inquiry without revealing more details. I think that's something that you can totally do. So yeah, I think that employers do have powers in a way, but when you are talking about effective implementation of the act, it is more than just removing that power from the employers. It's also a lot to do with building a culture of sorts, which says that this act is not something which is just for a compliance purpose. It's not something which has to be done just for a tick mark on your for your sponsorships or for your funds. It is a lot more than that, and that thought process needs to be instilled, I think. I agree with the the amendment that Dr. Anaga had talked about, which said that the quorum needs to be changed, and I think the external members should definitely be added in that quorum. As something which is a prerequisite for conducting an inquiry. But in a lot of policies, the external member is usually included within this quorum, and specifically pointed out that external member has to be present. So I think all organizations should kind of implement that also. I think that the impact and intent, which is something which a lot of people who are part of trainings, the audience often never understands, is that yes, for the purposes of taking a complaint, the impact that it has caused a person on the receiving it is very, very important. But not to say that the intent is not. So if we create that balance, and we try to make the audience or the demographic understand that this is an act which is comprehensive enough, and that this has consequences also if a wrong complaint or a false complaint has been filed, and your intention will be taken account of during the inquiry process, then things can get very easy, and they get more comfortable during the trainings. People often feel attacked with this act. There's no doubt about it. I've had my own set of experiences where I've been asked why this act favors women, or why is it like that, or why is it not for men. And I think the convention that Dr. Anaga had pointed out also talks about gender neutral laws so far as sexual harassment is concerned, if I'm not wrong, because there is a convention that was now introduced back in 2019, which said that sexual harassment at workplace should have gender neutrality as well. When we talk about sexual harassment at workplace for women, the first convention came out in 1979, and India got its act in 2013. So it took almost 30 years to do that. When it comes to gender neutral laws in this space of sexual harassment at workplace, I think we also have to, I'm not saying we have to, but I hope we don't have to wait for that long. And I also come from the school of thought where I believe that, sexual harassment is not gender specific, and it has a lot to do with a lot of variables, no doubt about it. Gender discrimination is one of them. But it also has a lot of subjectivity to it. It has a lot of other variables to it. And gender per se cannot be the only standpoint for understanding sexual harassment. So yeah, I think that's about it. I think questions are something that I could take on later. This is all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanya. There are some questions for you already in the chat. One is from Dr. Devika, who's agreeing with both Dr. Anagha and you that the external member is being excluded by employers taking advantage of Rule 7, and this has increased post-pandemic. There's also a question to please clarify which Bombay High Court judgment has spoken about sexism, misogynist behavior not being sexual harassment. Maybe if that's just the name of a judgment, you could respond in the chat. But there is one more question from Minnie Matthew asking more about the work that you do as a synergist. And I think that is of interest to other people as well, because that comes into how to prevent cases. But maybe we can take that at the end after Rashmi has also spoken. So we'll hold on to this question right now that Minnie Matthew has asked. So with this, I'd like to now invite our third resource person, who is Rashmi Singh. Rashmi is a gender expert, and she has over 20 years of experience in the area of gender and development. She is also a senior person working with PCVC, which is an international foundation working on crime prevention and victim care, particularly domestic violence cases. There is a confidentiality clause in the Sexual Harassment Act, so I can't talk about it, but Rashmi and I have been complaining to each other a lot, I think quite a lot, about various cases, but unfortunately we can't share the specifics of it. So I do know that Rashmi is an external member in many cases, and she has quite a vast experience in dealing with several problematic issues that have come up. So Rashmi, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Gayatri. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, okay, just a minute. I just place myself little more comfortably. Okay. I think thanks everyone, and I think it was very heartening to hear. I know we don't have much time, but here I think in my sharing, I would like to bring not what are the problems, but as an external member, what I have learned from others and use it to make the law work. And I think those are some of the things which I will share. Some work, some don't work. So one of the things when I was hearing to all of you, was that the role of the IC member, which very often I try to take on, is a person, when you're on the external member of any company or an organization, how the IC member actually can work as a catalyst to be a myth buster, that for not only the employees of the company, but I think also for the management. And some of the some of the notions, preconceived notions or myths, or maybe on some experiences which people very often come when you engage with the companies are, okay, so this is only about women, why it is only for women. And then basically how do I address that is that yes, it is for women, because but when I say that, I say yes, sexual harassment can happen with other people as well, other genders as well, but then particularly in India, the law of the land is for women, because the large number of cases happen with women. But having said that, the company recognizes that it can happen with other genders as well, and if an incident is reported, then a similar process can be followed to address it. But yes, at the moment, the law is for women. So I think that sometimes brings a balance. And also when in my trainings, if I'm using scenarios and I use a lot of AV tools, I have intentionally put like couple of scenarios where, you see the behavior of sexual harassment being conducted by a woman to a man also. So, this whole thing of the other thing is that this whole as an IC member, and that's why I say that I always feel that as an IC member, and as one of you already said, that the deeper understanding of gender and the structural issues is very much important, because I think that's what you take to the organization where you are as an IC member. And that's what I also do, is that this whole thing of that I constantly say when I start a training, or even when we are conducting an inquiry, that this is not about men versus women, or women versus men. The whole idea of this act is that how do we increasingly make workplaces more healthier and respectful, and how do we work on more on the prevention aspect, because even the law in India has been very intentionally named as prevention, prohibition and redressal. And even if you look at some of the trainings I do, I would say that almost 60 to 65% or 70% of my initial part of the training, they focus on I try to focus on the prevention part, that how do you identify, and how does one like bring in examples, that how do we create that culture of going up to a person and speaking up. And here I also bring very often in the training that we come from a culture where saying no is not something which is considered to be a very acceptable kind of a stance. So I think this is one thing. The other strategy with an external member, I feel that it has really worked while investigating the cases, is that constantly as an external member, the thing which I try to constantly reiterate is that let's not focus on the outcome or the result of the inquiry, but let us focus on the thorough and the fair process of the inquiry on the principles of natural justice. And constantly when you tell the management and the other IC members that yes, this is a step which we should not let go of, this documentation we must do. And I keep on consulting, like for example, Gayatri, 10 times during a day when I'm investigating a case, because as an external member, if you pitch in that way, that if the complainant or the respondent tomorrow decide to go to the tribunal, if any one of them is not satisfied with the findings of with the recommendations of the IC, then the tribunal is not going to come and tell you that your recommendations were wrong. What can be challenged is the fairness and the thoroughness with which the inquiry has been done. And also constantly pitching it to the management that implementing this law in its fullest spirit is in the interest of the organization and its credibility. I think, and I have seen that a lot of people in the management and employers, they come around then. And then being a feminist, I do get tempted at times that, I really want to take a very, although we all constantly work, I do not want to take that very radical approach, because again, coming from a gender lens, I also try to, bring in that whole element of that people can change. And then how, and when I say people can change, this is one struggle which I have always felt, that in organizations and in companies, a lot of time, there are very extreme stances which are taken by the management and the HR people over there. Either it will be, oh, it is only this much, then why she had to complain. But I've also had companies and organizations where they have said, oh, he sent this message, now we need to throw him out of the job. So I think as an IC member, what is that role is, I think, to bring in this perspective that it is not this way or that way. While I have had like constant negotiations and discussions, because it has to be a joint decision, But there have been couple of times where I have also taken a stand on the magnitude of the recommendations or I will say the penalty which should be recommended to the management to be taken against the man when the allegation has been proved. And constantly the pitch I try to make is that even in other crimes, the magnitude of punishment is not the same for theft and murder. So I think these are some of the pitches which I will say from my experience, and these are the experiences which I have tried to bring along with people like Gayatri and other people who I work with and I constantly consult with, and my beliefs increasingly is becoming stronger and stronger that yes, even despite the fact that yes, there are several gaps in this law, it sometimes as an external member I feel very disempowered. Like in one of the recent cases, it was that because the law says the IC will just say the allegation has been proved, now it is recommending the management to take actions as per the service rules of the company. Now that is very broad, but there I was constantly trying to push was that he had just sent like, I won't say just sent, but then he had sent like, let's say, there were 4 or 5 WhatsApp messages, and the management and the HR said, no, this is not tolerated and we are going to throw him out. Now, how, as coming from a gender lens, understanding that this is a mindset issue, this is coming from the whole thing of patriarchal mindset and socialization, how we increasingly also use this law to bring those very systemic changes within individuals and organizations. So I think these are some of the learnings which I have had for myself, and increasingly it increases my hope. Many a times in the IC, when we talk about patriarchal mindset, it is just not in men. It's just not about men. Even in the IC members, and as one of you rightly said, that how some of the IC members even conduct themselves while they are talking to the respondents, especially. We have to, and I constantly reinforce in my trainings and in my when I'm doing the inquiry, that a complaint filed does not mean that the incident has happened. So when we are talking to the respondent, the whole thing of talking to the person respectfully and not intimidating, because I think then even men, they are going to lose the whole trust and faith in the process. And the idea is, if we look at it from the gender point of view, I think it is all about working together. Recently, I'm handling a case, and I've been discussing like almost like every day with Gayatri on that case. Here is a wonderful example of a man heading the organization where he has actually decided to take a stand to a donor for a case of sexual harassment, while he knows that the donor contract is in the process of renewal. And he's taken that risk. Now, as people working on these issues, because we need to have not only more and more women like Gayatri and me, or and other people who are there, but we also need to have more and more men and more and other people from the gender. So I think this whole combination of looking at the entire act and every day learning from the cases and finding ways that how do we make it work, and how do we pitch it to the management, how do we pitch it to the employees. I've had cases where for example, I can name some of the companies also where there are no women at all, but then they are very serious about this act, and when I've done trainings with them, they have said, why our training is being done, there are no women in this organization. But then if you look at the management, so I think there are a lot of these positive examples as well, where different kinds of initiatives are being taken. Also, one of you mentioned that the decision. Yes, I totally agree that when it comes to decision on the recommendation which needs to be given to the management, very often there is a tussle between the IC members, but very often we have seen that it is like ultimately, one decision, something has to prevail. And then there are basic things on agreements on to disagree. And I think it is not about that external member, how it is seen, but also about as an external member, what value we have the opportunity to bring. And as in the beginning, the first speaker said that this is a great opportunity for workplaces and employers and a civil society organization to work with. And I think we should make the best use of this opportunity, despite that there are huge challenges. I'll stop here, and then Gayatri, over to you.
Thank you, Rashmi. Thanks very much. I can see there are a lot of comments on chat. Because I'm the moderator, I think I can take advantage and make the first observation. It was actually on Dr. Anadha's presentation. When it comes to not reporting cases and not taking up cases, when it comes to third-party cases, I've seen organizations just wash their hands completely. They say that they are not supposed to handle these cases, and I don't think that's in the spirit of the law at all, because even if though you may not be able to do an inquiry, you should be able to help the woman in some way or the other if she's experienced sexual harassment, maybe by an auto driver, or maybe she has experienced it by someone who is not an employee of the organization.
So Gayatri, can I just add?
Yes, please.
No, I just want to add to your point that that probably happens because internal committee members also see their role as only a complaint mechanism that does inquiry. Internal committee members do not really see their role as a body that handholds women and builds their confidence.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't see it as a prevention. Yeah. Okay, there are some questions. I think there's a little bit of debate going on whether Asia has said that very often the sexist culture is what leads to sexual harassment. So sexual harassment does not take place in a vacuum, and sexism is also sexual harassment. Dr. Devika has also elaborated on the judgment too. So I think there's a disagreement on whether sexist behavior should come within the definition of the act or not. Maybe Sanya, would you like to explain a bit more on why you think it should not come under the definition of the law, and why we should retain only sexual? Yeah, and also if you could explain, because Mini has also asked a little bit about the work that you do.
I'll do that. So I'm not coming from the space of absolutely excluding gender discrimination or gender biased behavior when a complaint comes on record by a complainant into a committee of POSH. What I'm trying to say is there are instances, of course, in my practical knowledge, whatever I've experienced so far, there is not a singular complaint anytime at any point in time. With me, whatever experiences I've had, one incident of sexual harassment has really not been listed and said that, okay, I was sexually harassed and they touched me and this is the complaint. Usually what happens is there's a sequence, there's a list of events which is laid out in the complaint, right? And absolutely, yes, there are lots of behaviors and gender discrimination and gender bias which act as variables and accelerate or in a way add to sexually harassing behavior. There is no doubt about that. However, the act as it stands today is very clear when it comes to taking complaints of sexual harassment. So when a complaint such as this comes where I have been shouted at or I was abused, which is something which did not have sexual overtones, I don't think that it will come under the POSH Act, also because there is another judgment very recently which had reiterated that. So this judgment is, this very recent one was by Madras High Court. And it says that, when a senior and, argues with a subordinate and they shout at them or they mistreat them, there is maltreatment involved, there will not be any kind of sexual harassment there. Right. So that is coming from a space of gender bias, where that woman is feeling targeted because she's a woman. But the court has clarified that there has to be sexual advance. There has to be an act or a conduct which has sexual overtones. So it is not specifically talking about sexism, misogynistic comments, or gender bias per se. It is saying that it has to have sexual advances to fall under the purview of the act. Of course, when we are talking about taking our complaints, we cannot, segregate every incident and every sequence of event like that. But when we are inquiring into such complaints, I think there is a need to segregate there, right? Because then the whole purpose of the act gets defeated when we start, collating everything together and only seeing it from that lens, and not segregating it and seeing that, okay, this is the act which falls under the act, and this is the act which requires this magnitude of recommendation. As rightly pointed out by Ms. Rashmi, she said that, has to be a balance there. So looking at the judgments and looking at the current trends, I personally feel that my reading of the act, so far as this is concerned, seems appropriate. But of course, disagreements are always welcome.
Gayatri, I just want to clarify something.
Yeah.
So when I spoke about gender discrimination being included, I was not talking about an amendment to the act. I think there is a gross misunderstanding and people have not, listened to me carefully. I said that it can become a part of the anti-sexual harassment policy. I'm not talking about the definition in the act. I'm not talking about amending the definition of sexual harassment in the act. So let us not talk about the act. I was talking about including gender discrimination in the purview of the internal committee within the anti-sexual harassment policy. I hope people now understand what I was saying.
Thank you for clarifying that. So not to bring it within the purview of the act, but to include it within the policy, so that, yes, we do know that gender-based discrimination, where in offices where there is more GBV, there's more likelihood of violence as well. If there are any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can type it in the chat box.
Gayatri, this is Dr. Devika. I just want to make a clarification. I think it's a very necessary clarification, because we are, all of us who are here, we are all experts in our own rights and are working in this field. Okay, see, what happens is when we often start training on this act and reading up on this act, we often read and train on this act in English. And because we read and train on this act in English, we start thinking of the word sexual harassment only. I want to take this group to Laingik Utpidan. There is a Hindi draft of this act, and this Hindi draft is as much, okay, of how this act is interpreted in the majority of this country. And now let me please bring you to the words Laingik Utpidan. The act does not use the words yawn utpidan or yonic utpidan, which is how the IPC, which is interpreted in Hindi, all right, which is how the Indian Penal Code uses sexual harassment under the 354A judgment, where it says yonic shoshan. Okay, there is a difference between Laingik and yonic as is understood in the Hindi language, and this is what we also fail to nuance in the English language. Yonic relates to the sexual parts or private parts of the body, hence your act of sex, etc., comes under that. But Laingik refers to the sex of a person, and in gender is also the sex of a person. So often a lot of cases of gender-based discrimination, what can come down to being sex-based discrimination, can also be treated as sexual harassment under this act.
Thank you, Devika. That's very interesting to note. In the cases that I have been involved in as well, internal committees tend to make a very clear distinction, and if it is sexist behavior and not sexual behavior, they will not act upon it. My own understanding is that, like Dr. Anagha said, it should be part of the policy, perhaps if not an inquiry, at least something should be done in the workplace to change the culture, to change the way people talk to each other, the way they address women. Thank you.
See, it's an unfortunate context, because if you look at the Convention for Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, from which our Vishakha judgment has come and from which the 2013 Act is drawn. And when you see the reading of 3.2 along with 2n, if we were to lose sight of the fact that gender-based discrimination is really is really the place from where sexual harassment is coming, then a lot of external members would not be able to educate their ICs properly.
Are there any other questions? You can type them on the chat
Gayatri?
or unmute. Yes, please.
Ms. Gayatri, this is Usha. I'm an external member operating from Visakhapatnam, Andhra Pradesh. And I'm glad to be on this forum today. It was a very learning session. One thing I wanted to share was with regard to when we receive complaints, the kind of spirit with which we act in our internal committee is that, we find every reason to take the complaint, and we don't try to look into any reason or any clause why we shouldn't take the complaint. Like our learned speakers put in, during the inquiry, we have these filters, sexual and unwelcome in nature. It's when then we can decide whether it is a HR issue, a performance issue, or a discipline issue, or it is a sexual issue. But when the complainant comes with an issue, it is deemed to be taken as a complaint and the inquiry starts, then it will be decided whether it has to go to the HR or the IC takes it on. And yes, like Ms. Devika put in, it's a wonderful thing that we all keep missing, that, it all starts with a bias, which is an unconscious bias. And if companies are going ahead and making this policy gender neutral, they don't need to wait for a legislation or an act to be passed in the parliament. They can actually make this gender neutral. And I'm working with organizations which have made this gender neutral, and I train both men and women on all the aspects of the act, making them aware. And hopefully the day is not far off, not as far as 30 years. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one chat question from Damayanti that all the resource persons talked of inculcating a culture in organizations. Any example? Maybe Rashmi, do you have any example of trying to change the culture of the organization to become more gender friendly? And I know that so long as it doesn't violate the confidentiality clause. I have one of the there's one more chat that from Sweksha. My request is similar to Damayanti. Can we get some examples of the policy documents which are gender neutral one can adopt from? I'm not sure if we can share policies of organizations and workplaces, but yes, many offices have formed gender neutral policies where both men and women are covered. Use of inappropriate language, such as emojis, the kind that with the kissing and the heart shape, all that is prevented in the policy. But if any other resource person has an example.
Example about the culture.
Yeah, changing the culture.
I think the most important thing when it comes to changing the culture is what I had said earlier, and I know, I mean, I have interacted with certain private sector companies which are large in size, and whenever the employee awareness sessions have been done, the person who is anchoring the session, so I am the resource person, the company person who is anchoring the session tells out very openly that please complain, and it doesn't matter whether the person is a senior in terms of their position, or in terms of their number of years of experience, vintage, etc. So I think this is one example which I have seen, because this is this is actually a game changer, because when men and women employees are together, for the company to make this statement that it doesn't matter whether the person is junior, senior, whether the person is powerful. We are going to treat all complaints in a similar manner, and we will, follow the law. I think that is a game changer. So this is one thing which I have seen.
Thank you. Yeah, and many organizations share their policy on websites. Damayanti's just pointed that out. Another example of changing the culture, one question that I find Human Resources asks practically every woman when she's joining is, are you married? When are you planning to have a baby? This is, I think, something that really it just shows the culture of the organization as having a very gender discriminatory mindset, and it's something that I do encourage people to change. Do we have time for one more question?
Gayatri, I just want to speak very briefly about the gender neutrality.
Okay.
I just want to say this, that, I know that, very recently there have been discussions about, transgender persons and trans persons. If they face harassment from women, what is the recourse, etc. And that requires a lot of in-depth discussion amongst the women's groups and women's organizations. But I think I am at this moment, I'm not really in favor of having a gender neutral law. Of course, as far as the policy is concerned, yes, because a policy can be gender neutral. I am not completely against it, because I don't deny that men and all others, gender fluid, gender binary, all these people, I don't deny that they face sexual harassment. But when it comes to, so the policy can be gender neutral, and I think the policy definitely should specify that, who will be dealing with complaints coming from persons who are not women or who are not falling in the category of women. What are going to be the reliefs that they are going to get, because the reliefs and privileges that are there in the law will not be automatically extended to these groups. So all these things the policy has to specify. But when it comes to the law, I think, when we achieve gender equality in all other, walks of life, when we have gender equality in education, employment, health, labor force participation, is only when we can talk about gender neutrality of laws. I think legal gender neutrality is the last thing, which will come only when we achieve gender neutrality as far as other indicators of gender equality are concerned. So, that is my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are probably not yet ready. Sujata has her hand up, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gayatri. I was just wondering, taking up on Anagha's last intervention, whether we could look at it in terms of policies, whether we can push for something like that the complainant can be anybody, man, woman, trans person, but the respondent should be a man. So you cannot complain. A man cannot complain against a woman. A man can complain against a man. A trans person can complain against a man. Because this is basically because.
Sujata, your voice is getting cut.
Sorry, this is because of the power balance, the skewed power relationships that exist. So if you, it's very easy for men in powerful positions to say that a woman harassed me. Why? So I think one of the ways to get over this in terms of the intermediate period, at least, which can be several years, would be to say that the complainant can be anybody, but but you cannot complain against a woman. So the respondent has to be a man. So this is a similar thing that women's groups have suggested for definitions of rape, etc., etc. So this can be one consideration, that one could have a discussion about within sexual harassment committees, etc.
I think
Thank
for that,
you.
we need to have a meeting, a proper offline meeting at some nice venue, and we'll have to debate this with a lot of groups. And okay, I see 2 more people have their hands up. I think we'll take 2 more and then we'll have to close because we are out of time. We're already running out of time. But thank you for your suggestions, Sujata. I know there's a lot of debate on this that we'll have to have. Two participants had their hands up, or was it by mistake that?
Yeah, ma'am, I just wanted to add something. So in our limited capacity, when we share with students or young girls, or even boys, or even men at workplaces, when the question about where will we complain? So basically what we share, like, you know, as long as the act is there, we have to follow what is there. When it changes, we'll follow that. But we say that, you know, before this act, before 2013, where would anybody complain? And also if there was an issue in the office, which is not sexual in nature, where would you complain? So there's always some mechanism. There's an HR, or if it's a school, there would be a principal or somewhere. So all those options are always available to everyone. It can be looked into a normal disciplinary issue or something. So there's not that, oh, this act leaves a whole group of people out. So it never leaves anybody out. You always have an option of taking something else. So it shouldn't be a big issue at all that this act leaves people out, or they feel, you know, what about us? Because there's always another, what about before 2013? Where would everybody go? You know, so we just shared that, don't worry. There are things that you can do. Don't think that this act leaves me out. You can definitely use it, and the management can take it up as a normal issue, you know, a normal HR issue or a normal issue in a different type of organization. So I just wanted to add that. I always try to, so people don't feel left out, people feel included, and they can learn in any way. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Sure. So what you're saying is that men can also complain if they want to HR, rather than come to the committee.
What was the other mechanism? Where would women go before 2013 if they face an issue?
Code of conduct.
Not a sexual issue, a normal issue. So there is always somewhere you could go. You don't have to keep quiet if you're suffering. You can say something, but there's a different forum for everything. So you can do that till, say, the act changes, or, you know, you don't have to be worried about this act, or it leaves me out.
Sure.
The company code of conduct is there.
Fine. So we would have to have a very lengthy debate on this issue. I know that gender neutrality versus gender subjectivity, specificity is
Gayatri,
issue.
Gayatri, just a quick thing, if I may add. Yeah,
Yes.
Because I'm with an organization which is following a gender neutral policy. It actually builds confidence in the entire system if you have a gender neutral policy, and you find that you can buy in more men into, you know, this policy is actually going to make the workplace a better place to work. So this is what we observed. And, you know, when you have a gender neutral policy, it's like the management is also, if you find the UN sustainability goals, you know, the development goals which are there, they talk about gender equality. And for that gender equality, a POSH Act and, you know, the amendments with regard to having a creche at a facility where, you know, it facilitates more women to come to work or stick to their work. All these things come under our way towards gender equality. So I feel having a gender neutral policy is actually going to buy in more men into this, believing into this cause, and participate unequivocally when it comes to any complaints arising in the organization. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we would have to close. We've said an hour and a half, and we're already an hour and 45 minutes. So I thank you everyone for participating. I know this issue is just, it's been debated in other laws as well, gender neutrality in sexual violence laws, not just sexual harassment. Can I request, many more discussions need to happen. Damayanti, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Gayatri. I was just going to say the same thing. Yes, this is a topic which needs much more discussion, and seeing the interest which everyone has kind of voiced, I think we will try to organize more such and with more specific things, and maybe take in advance the particular aspects which we want to discuss. I think it's very important to have such open discussions, because like in our office also, we have a policy, and we always feel that we have a very good policy. But when I was talking about the culture, that is why it's important that one needs to have these discussions, however much one feels that everything is fine. It's never the case. And I think I'll repeat what Dr. Anaga said in the beginning, that if there is not a single complaint, that doesn't mean that there is no sexual harassment happening. And to build that culture, how one gets about it and all, is something which needs constant discussions. And I hope that we are able to do that. We did miss out totally on the informal sector today, and but I think we did cover a lot of ground otherwise. So maybe that's another thing which we can take up separately. Thank you, Gayatri. I think it was very, very interesting having these discussions today.
Thank you, everybody, for participating, and thank you for your suggestions. We will be doing a report of this webinar, and if you would like a copy, please reach out to us. Several of you have also messaged asking for contact details of the resource persons. If you can just send WPC a mail, I will just coordinate. So just, should I just type out, Aisha, can we type out WPC's email address on the chat?
I'll just share the details.
All right. And thank you, everybody, and have a very nice evening. Feedback, no, we have, you can send it to us on email. So we will appreciate your feedback on email as well. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.